everybody. So, beautiful weather on this Monday morning. Just kidding. So, we've been doing a bunch of stream ciphers. So, we have a short key, and we have some initialization vector, and then we're getting a key stream. Now that is just bits, zeros and ones all the time. Doesn't tell us how we're encrypting. Encrypting is then just XORing with a message. XORing the message M with a key stream. Now that means if you have anywhere bit flip in your key stream, sorry, in your ciphertext, so you're now sending this over either a kind of noisy channel, or you're sending it more likely over a channel where Eve is sitting there messing with your channel, then, well, the other side will get the same key stream, because, well, that's computed without noise, and then there's an XOR on a message M prime, which somewhere has a bit flip. In the very first lecture, I was highlighting like the reasons why we need cryptography, and so far we've been covering completely only the part about confidentiality. The attacker shouldn't be able to learn anything about a message. Well, actually, we've been covering lots of schemes where the attacker can learn something about the message, because we need to figure out like how the old schemes failed in order to figure out how to design new schemes. So we've been learning more about the failures of Alice and Bob and the successes of Eve than about the successes of Alice and Bob. Now, luckily there are some, that's what your computer is hopefully using, but we continue to look into how we can deal with such issues. So this means a bit flip in the ciphertext C, and then, well, let's just say C changes to C prime. Leads to a changed message M prime. In such a way, so if you look at our ciphertext, we have C0, C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, etc. And then each bit we're decrypting, we're getting a 0, M1, M2 by, well, XORing the key on here, K1, K0. So this is not the original short key, this is the key stream, K1, K2, etc. And then if one of those guys here flips into, well, if it was 0, turns 1, if it was 1, turns 0, so just plus 1, we get the same plus 1 on the message. Now, other bits, third or first, before or after, are not affected at all. So it's a totally local error, which will induce a totally local error in the message. So there is no effect on any other bytes. Well, bits actually. Now that's good in the sense if it's an accidental error, then we don't have too much problems with it, and for most messages you can recover it from the context. But if this bit is like the amount in your credit card transaction or a meeting time, then this is kind of a mess. Now, at the end of last lecture, I was talking about fingerprints, and that's actually one of the reasons we have fingerprints for file downloads. So So if you download a big file like an operating system or some file, like executable somewhere, then you typically get a link where you can download the file. It also tells you something about a hash sum or a fingerprint or something. So fingerprints take care of this. So what we could do is we're sending the ciphertext and we're sending, say, the hash of the ciphertext. This H here was the hash function. Now this is good enough against accidental errors. So if your concern is that you're downloading Linux from somewhere and there's a bit flip, so you don't actually get the proper Linux, then you do notice that this doesn't match and you try again. So it's good enough against random accidental errors. But if you're now an attacker and you try to feed me some false information, you still don't know how much bank transfer was, but you assume it was not 1,000,000, so you flip the bit which corresponds to the most significant bit. I likely had this as a 0, this will likely turn into a 1. This is not what I want. I might agree to sending you a euro because I have pity with your cause or something. I wouldn't necessarily send you 1,000,001 euro. Not that I have that much anyway. So, if you're the attacker, what you do? Yes, it's early, I know. But such attacks you should be able to do in your sleep. Yeah?
You just send a new hash.
There's nothing secret in there, right? It's a hash of ciphertext. So this doesn't help against attacker. But an attacker can send C prime, which is C plus some error. So this is now an error string of the full length. And hash of the C prime. Yeah, there's nothing secret in there. Now, of course, you could change this to oof, maybe better. We'll send the hash of the message. And that does do something against this attack that he just mentioned. I mean, the attacker doesn't know the original message, so he can't compute the hash of the message plus whatever error he wants to put on there. So that's okay. On the other hand, this is inconvenient because now you have to figure out first what the message was. So you first decrypt this mess, and then you find out that something went wrong. So takes care of this. What means decrypting before finding error. Before finding the error. Now, when you're using this system, like you, Alice, and Bob, you have a shared secret key, the key that goes into the stream cipher. You actually have some shared secrets already. So the way that we typically do it is that we have two secrets. We have one secret for our stream cipher, and we have one secret for this thing which now turns into what we call a Message Authentication Code. So this thing anybody could compute, well, the hash of C anybody could compute. The hash of M only the people can compute who have the message. But what we like to do is actually link in a key. So the actual use also has an extra key, and that thing is called an authentication key. And then I've been just giving one example, which is using a hash function. The general construction is called a Message Authentication Code. So you use an authentication key in what we usually call a MAC, so in a Message Authentication Code. So the simplistic view is that there is C, which is now the encryption of the message under some encryption key. So this is now the encryption key. And then there is a MAC, some authentication tag. It's called string A, which is the authentication under key of I will write M, but the typical way that we want to use it is with C. M/C. So the nicest way is to authenticate the ciphertext, so then you can simply very quickly discard anything that was wrong. So if there was a malicious or accepted error, then you know this was not right. And you can either raise a flag or discard it depending on how your protocol handles resending. So to authenticate C, discard C prime without decrypting. Now, functionality-wise, it doesn't really matter. We could decrypt, all our ciphers can be fast enough. There's a little bit of this feeling we shouldn't allow the user to see ciphertext, well, wrong plaintext. So if we know that C is actually not the right one, so if this authentication failed, then we shouldn't decrypt. So we should never ever give the user something which is actually wrong. So many systems still use the old version, which is we use an authenticator M, which means you first decrypt, then you compute the authenticator. Nowadays, people are moving, or protocol designs is moving towards authentication of C. So you have a fast failure, and you also have the benefit you never get any wrong plaintext. So it was nicest. Otherwise, the user might see some flawed M part. I don't know how many of you, when you're using PGP, and there was like about a third of you used PGP before, when you're getting your signature, do you actually check the signature? If it's in your mail program, it might automatically do this for you and say, yep, good signature. But if you're getting a file, are you actually checking it? Well, I do it if I download some operating system because, well, then I'm sufficiently paranoid to do it. But I wouldn't necessarily do it for a random message. So the same is true for message authentication codes. If you don't force the user to first check it, it won't happen. So it might be that the program just decrypts it, there's a flawed M prime, but hey, you didn't ask it to check the correctness, so it doesn't check the authentication code. Or it does, but keeps quiet about it. Or you have already used it. So a good protocol. When that's protocol, this is something we typically call cooking recipes in cryptography. I think you've all seen the network security course, then you have seen internet protocols. So for those who somehow managed to get into the class without having seen this, a protocol is something like a cooking recipe. You're used to this name for something like a cooking recipe when it comes to diplomatic visits, president of country A visits president of country B, and then there's a protocol of who talks to whom, who meets and greets whom at which point. So that kind of protocol, or that kind of use of the word protocol is what we mean for cryptography. So a sequence of steps. Step 1, you're getting a ciphertext. Step 2, you check the authenticator. If the authenticator is valid, step 3, decrypt. If the authenticator is invalid, throw away the whole thing. So that's a good protocol. Bad protocol would be, receive the message, decrypt, use. Does the user want to see the authenticator? Yes, no, well, maybe. So good protocol design. Enforces checking of A before decryption. Now I set simplistic view up there because I don't tell you how this works at all. So a simple view, a simple Mac would be just taking A as the hash of, say, your authentication token, key auth, authentication key, k auth, and then the ciphertext. Now, without looking into hash functions any further, this might actually be fine. From the properties that we had for hash functions, that's probably okay. But what if you have a hash function which goes in rounds? And unfortunately, most of our hash functions do process the ciphertext in rounds. So there's a typical hash function designed due to Merkle and Damgard. Well, actually, the design is from Merkle, the proofs are Merkle and Damgard. Which says you have your message goes in as blocks. Then we call this uppercase M now because these are typically 128 or 256-bit blocks. These are not single bits. So these are blocks of 128 or 256 bits. And then we have some initialization vector or some constant. And now this and the first message block go into a function which does a compression. So it takes something which is like full length, another full length, and outputs half length. So this will be n bits, this will be n bits, and it outputs, shorter, it outputs n bits. So it compresses 2 n bits to n bits. This is our function big C. So this is the compression function. And once you have got this thing going, then you have just a way to iterate and iterate and iterate. So now you have n bits coming out of here, like the initial constant. You throw it in the same box C again. You merge in the message, which is another length n piece. And then eventually you get length n, this is your output, which is the head of the message. So I'm now thinking of m as m0, m1, m2, where capital M0 is my old little m0, m1, m2, till say m127. M1 is little m128, m129, etc. till m255, and so on. So I would now go for 128-bit blocks. Each of those is big. Then here we have a compression function. This takes strings of length n times strings of length n and compresses them to strings of single lengths. So 2n to n. Now the nice thing about such a design is you can build very, very small. You just need to build one bit compression function. You need to have some streaming way of getting a message in, this time in blocks instead of bits. But it's just another of those. We can turn the crank indefinitely. No matter how long the message is, we can just go on. And then the nice thing is that Merkle and Damgard proved that this thing is a good hash function, meaning collision resistant, pre-merge resistant, not heavy enough, if C is good. So this whole design is collision resistant if C is collision resistant. Now remember, on Thursday we went through this, like how long does it take to find pre-images, second pre-images, collisions. Just brute force birthday attack, you can do a 2 to the n over 2. But there are lots and lots of strings, so how can you figure out that there's nothing stronger? Now what Merkle and Damgard have shown is you can focus on something which has finite inputs and build something out of it with the same property that has infinite inputs. That's very nice, and so lots of the old designs were based on Merkle and Damgard. There are some fine prints, leave some space in there. Now, what's the problem if we use this with this very simple map? And let's assume for a moment that the length of the authentication key is the same 128 or 256 or whatever we use for the blocks here, or at least is divisible by the block length.
Are you going to send a new message to the old message?
I can make the message longer, yes. If I have something which is good for ciphertext something, I can just make it longer. I might not know what the extension is, it's just some random garbage, but I can totally screw up the communication between Alice and Bob. If the message was, let's meet for lunch, and you add something which adds into on the 15th of December, that's quite different from let's just meet for lunch, because then people would think it's today and not whatever random date this translates to. So even if you don't know what the ciphertext comes from, if you are able to append a box, that's a bad idea. Now, why can we do this here? That's because up there, there's no ending. I mean, it just continues. So the previous output from just this C, if I then add on December 15th, will just be another box or another two boxes, just more pieces which get fed through it. So watch out. The simple map allows for length extension. So if somebody gives you a valid authenticator for C, you can extend this to a valid authenticator for C appended something else. So Eve can extend valid authenticator so A, which is the hash of this authentication key with the ciphertext, to A prime, which is the hash of something that the attacker doesn't know, the authentication key, and then just C appended some C prime. Because the hash function, this H here, processes C, well, first key auth, comma C, and then the C prime would be, well, in as many blocks as needed, and then the C prime starts with the next box. So this gives us the A, and then Eve uses the compression function on A as input, and from up here comes C prime. And however many boxes she needs there. Now there are some ways to prevent this, because this is also kind of a mess if you want to use a hash function for other purposes. You don't just want to give somebody the possibility to have prefixes. And so the typical way is to put some fixed padding here. It's not a full fix, so it's a partial fix. So we're adding a fixed formatted padding. As the last blocks. So typical examples would be you have your message and then the last part of the message, let's call this thing here MN, what's not used? I know this is the time of year where you just go to Albert Heijn and buy letters, right? Z is in use here. MZ. So, for example, MZ is the last few boxes from M. So it's a little m. You have 34. This is not quite aligned. 3, 4. Yeah, 384 is the first one. 385, and that would be the normal end of your message. And then the typical multi-guide padding would say you then put a 1, you're putting as many zeros as necessary to fill a full block. And then at the end, you say how many blocks there were. So if the first block goes to 127, the next block goes to 255, the next one goes to 384, so I have 3 full blocks. These are 4 full blocks, so that there is, well, that many bits, 385, well, 386 bits covered. So here I put the length of M. So this fills, this overrides the zeros, and this assumes if the length fits. Else, we use another block. Of course, you can also change this by flipping the order, by first putting the message and then the authenticator. So the message is not under the control of the attacker, the C, and then there's the authenticator. On the other hand, then the attacker is searching for collisions, has a good chance, so we could use also the hash of first the message or ciphertext and then the authenticator. But then if somebody finds a collision on H, for H, if you find a collision which H of C is H of C prime, and you have this kind of design, that means, okay, you're getting the same output at this moment. So it doesn't matter that you put the authenticator, well, the authenticator is the same, so it doesn't matter that the part before was different. If they merge at some point, then they will have the same. So then a collision for C, on H for these two gives a collision for H of C and then the key authenticator being the same as hash of C prime, the key authenticator. And this is again because of the length extension. For this course, I will totally skip any details of how hash functions work beyond like the schematic drawing. We've been going through RC4, we'll be going through another cipher called DES in detail. There are a bunch of interesting ones out there, but they're not as obviously broken. So we're not going to do them here in the course, but I should still name drop them. So broken hash functions. Of course, if you do the baby example was doing like just mod 3 or mod 1000, that's obviously broken, but it also was not proposed as anything. Broken hash functions that were actually proposed. MD, in this case not global dumgat, but message digest. And then MD4 is really badly broken. Then there's MD5, which you still find a lot for file checksums. And again, if it's just against accidental errors, there's nothing really wrong with it. It's very unlikely that a random bit flip will introduce an error in MD5 which leads to a collision. Actually, finding collision in MD5 is still some effort. However, you can do it, so if your security depends on it, you should not believe MD5. So, collisions exist, and well, it's computable. And what you do there is you basically have a choice of a chosen prefix. So you start your message with whatever you want, and then the collisions are strong enough, or the ways that the attack is going is strong enough that you pick your two starts that you want and you merge them repeatedly. You'll need to append some random crap. Well, so the initial attacks on MD5 were such that you were using PDF files. Now PDF encoding is pretty generous. You have something that you're shown, and then there's a lot of characters that the PDF viewer will just ignore. So it's relatively easy to come up with two meaningful, i.e. displaying to the human in a meaningful way PDF files that give a collision with MD5. Just because you can take something which is under your choice. I sell you my house for $1 million, I sell my house for €1. Those would be like the attacker's choice of the chosen prefix. And then you come up with some merge. So the chosen prefix attacks. Actually, MD5 attacks were partially done here, so they started with, MD5 attacks have been going on since it was designed. I mean, as soon as something becomes public, cryptographers jump on it and try to break it. MD4 was already somewhat broken in the 90s by Hans Doherty, and MD5, Doherty, Pernell, and Anton Bosselars were saying, hey, we can't really break it, but if you do like some small tweaks, we can break it. Now that should have been a warning sign to everybody because, well, it's not exactly the right thing, but it gives you a feeling that something isn't good about it. And then in 2005, Xiaoyun Wang was completely breaking it. So it was quite exciting. There was suddenly the full cryptanalysis of MD5. Actually, no, wait, 2004, not 2005. So she was at Crypto, which is like our big conference in summer in Santa Barbara. So all the cryptographers try to be there, not just because the weather is nice, but also because stuff happens, such as attacks. And so there was this little Chinese lady who wasn't very fluent in English, but she had a collision on MD5. She had 2 messages that hashed the same thing. So she was running around to all the people who at that point were in hash functions. So IBM, Tanju, Bernstein, and so on. Like, she was showing this to everybody, and then somebody implemented it and it didn't work. So she didn't have an attack. Now the problem was that she hadn't taken MD5 from whatever US standard web page, but she has taken MD5 from a fairly popular textbook due to Bruce Schneier. And there were some typos in Bruce Schneier's textbook. In particular, he got the encoding the wrong way around. I mean, I've been trying to be proper and say, okay, whenever I start, I'll start with the least significant bits, write them this way. And he had just done one such swap. Now her attack was cool enough that she could recover this. So within a day, she had managed to do a MD5 attack on the right order. And honestly, at that point, it didn't matter whether she spoke good English or not. There's just like 2 strings that collided, and everybody knew that she had done something that nobody had done before. So it was pretty cool, and then she was trying to give a presentation about it, which was absolutely incomprehensible and absolutely stunning. And leave some space here. She also started attacking something called SHA1. So MD5 had some scratches. SHA1, people were like, maybe we can do something. There was something in between. When you see SHA1, then you should always ask, how about SHA or SHA0? So this one was already broken a while ago. People were joking that this was just a summer intern at the NSA. And then afterwards they did the real thing, SHA1. So MD5 broken 2004, 5, 6. Then people here in Eindhoven started working on this. So Mark Stevens, who is now a professor in Amsterdam at CWI, did his master thesis with Benny de Wever on MD5. And they were going into like making this thing more practical. So 2 random strings colliding should be the death of any function, of any hash functions, but it took for a long, long, long time. So they had one attack which was kind of cute. They called it the Nostradamus attack. So Nostradamus is this, ooh, everything is in the Bible, you just have to read it, the whole future is there. Now they were going like, well, we have our Nostradamus attack, here is a website. This was just before the US election back then. And they're like, look, we can predict the winner of the US election. Here is a commitment, here's the hash output. So they had found a way, there was the 2008 election if I remember correctly, so they had found a way to hash all the possible candidates to the same string with some fluffy text around it, say Barack Obama will be the winner and whoever the competition was is not going to lose, or something like use your freedom and imagination, but they had managed to come up with a prediction which definitely was true. Did that kill MD5? No. Finally, 2008, a bunch of people again, including Mark and Benne, and also Ari Lenster, Andrei Socherov, David Molnar, and Jake Applebaum, they actually finally got MD5 out of everything by showing a certificate for a so when you go with your web browser to a website and you probably go with HTTPS, you see this little log. Then this little log tells you somebody paid money. They paid money to something called a certification agency, which then issued a certificate saying, yes, this is really your bank, or this is really Gmail or something. Now what they managed to do is go to the root of this whole thing. So they got a certificate that allows him to sign anything. So they got a CA root certificate. And that finally removed MD5. So at that point, there was the Microsoft MD5 Cleanup team, which was going through all pieces of code trying to find all the usage of MD5 in something which was security critical, like, well, this hash functions, or what we'll see next week, in signatures. So anything where a hash of a message was used in place of the message itself, and that was using MD5 for something with security. They didn't do a particularly good job, because years after we still find cases where MD5 is in certificates, and then those attacks going back to when get broken. There was the Gauss and Flame attacks, which actually were using MD5 collisions to break into some nuclear facilities, so to get people in Iran trust some certificates that they shouldn't have trusted because of MD5. So bad crypto is really, really a problem in the real world. Now, MD5 is now recognized as bad. SHA1 got scratched in the early attacks, then it was dancing around with security to the 60-something. Again, Mark Staven's doing a lot of the work. And we're always like, hey Mark, you should break the damn thing. We want to get rid of SHA1. It's not a good cipher. It's not a good hash function. Finally this year, SHA1 is broken. So, yes. The problem with such hash functions is everyone knows that it's really hard to publish yet another paper. You can't just say, oh, instead of 2 to the 64, I now have it at 2 to the 63.5. Unless your tech is super, super smart, nobody's interested. We know it's broken. On the other hand, the companies won't put a 50-man force onto removing SHA1 everywhere if it's not really, really broken, if you don't have like the dead corpse. Right now, there's discussions on GitHub to finally move away from SHA1. Now, GitHub is saying that they only use SHA1 for checking file integrity. They don't use it as a signature kind of thing. But again, people are very concerned about somebody doing a malicious update which then matches some other piece just by extending such a collision. So it's now finally broken. SHA-0 is broken. I will go 2 minutes over time just to finish on hash functions. Because it's not all doing, so okay for now. There's a SHA-2 family that is very different in design from the SHA-0, SHA-1. So it's really several years later, different ideas about designing. It's not using this thing where you have an N gets what we call a white pipe, so it comes in with 2N on the left, so the state is much bigger. So the amount of bits you process compared to the size that you're keeping is smaller. So it's like processes N bits while keeping a state of 2N bits. So if you before had a compression function of 128 to 128, you would now have a 256, 128 to 256. And that makes these a lot harder to attack. So that's the SHA-2, and those you see typically as SHA-256, and you see them as SHA-512, and you sometimes see them also as SHA-384, which is just the, well, this is a part of the 512. So the 384 design does the same thing as the SHA-512. It processes, and then when it comes to outputting 512 bits, it just ignores the 256. And then there's a new design called TanjaCrypt, which since recently is called SHA-3. So that is actually how we like to design cryptography. There was an international competition run by NIST. NIST said, hey, hash function designers in the world, please submit something, what you think is good, and we'll have some time. How much time do we need? Okay, let's make this 4 years. Day 1, okay, now is one thing. There's a long discussion about like what a hash function should satisfy, what the requirements are for the submission. Then everything gets submitted. NIST checks a few things, whether this is properly formatted, and then there is all the submissions. and then pretty much everybody jumps on it, trying to break the competition. That is the nice thing of having cryptographic competition, that you're a submitter. You're naturally motivated to break the shit out of all the other ones because you want to win. So this was pretty tough. Most people were really busy with this since, well, mid-2000s when this started. There were some jokes that NIST was running this competition because the NSA didn't want anybody to break SHA1, which was partially true because everybody who could have broken SHA1 was busy in the SHA3 competition. And indeed, I mean, SHA1 held up till this year. So it took till 2017 till anybody actually took the resources in, say, GPU time to really break SHA1. But that's done now, and we have a new standard. And with the SHA3, people have looked at it. Of course, there are people who say, oh, my standard, my proposal was much nicer. There have been 5 finalists, and pretty much any of those 5 finalists is just as good. If you want to build a protocol like TLS that everybody uses, you want to have a small set that everybody supports. You don't want to have a long negotiation, which one shall we use. But if you're building your standalone encryption system and you need a hash function, and for some reason you prefer Blake 2 over Ketchuk, you can just use it. It's one of the other finalists. It's just as fine. People have looked at it. It has some other trade-offs between speed and size and so on. So compared to lecturing crypto some years ago, I would say after the SHA3 competition, 2 things. We have much higher confidence in the SHA3 thing than in any previous hash function, and we have gotten much higher confidence in the SHA2 family of hash functions, because that was always the benchmark. So it was always, you have to be at least as fast as SHA2 or break SHA2. So through all of this whole thing, nobody has managed to break SHA2, and SHA2 has gotten faster. That's the other way of winning the competition, making the benchmark faster so that more people fall below the benchmark. So if you're not faster than SHA2, you couldn't really win the competition. In the end, they were a little relaxed there. Okay, so that's what I want to talk about. Hash functions. There's a whole bunch more to say about message authentication codes. Stay on for the master's course, I would say. So after the break, we'll start more about block ciphers. We start again at 5 to 12.